Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I am going to tell you all about the smallpox ghosts of Rue Saint-Louis. With over 500 documented ghost stories, Montreal is easily the most haunted city in Canada, if not all of North America. Here at Haunted Montreal, we're dedicated to researching these paranormal tales, and our channel brings you new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. Today, we examine the smallpox ghosts who haunt the Faubourg Saint-Louis in Old Montreal. But before we get into today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you get notified every time we have a new tale to share. And hey, if you're already subscribed, a big thank you and welcome back. We're happy to have you here. Now, without further ado, let's get spooky. Heading eastward from Old Montreal's Champ de Mars, Rue Saint-Louis is a quaint but neglected street that does not appear on the tourist circuit. Perhaps it is just as well given the disturbing ghosts who allegedly haunt the area. During the smallpox epidemic of 1885, when the neighborhood of Faubourg Saint-Louis was at the heart of a largely French-speaking slum, Saint-Louis Street was one of the most infected parts of the city. It witnessed a large number of deaths due to the terrible disease, including well over 1,000 children. The tragedy was triggered in late February of 1885 when a conductor of the Grand Trunk Railway named George Longley arrived in Montreal showing symptoms of smallpox. When he arrived at Bonaventure Station, he was feverish and covered with red pustules, most of them bursting all over his hands, face, chest, and arms. He was immediately admitted to the Hôtel Dieu Hospital in Montreal. While Longley would ultimately survive, his pus-soaked bedding infected an Acadian girl named Pélagie Robichaud who worked in the laundry. She was the first to fall victim to the 1885 epidemic. Her burial certificate indicates that she passed away on April 2nd. During the era, smallpox was seen as the worst possible disease. Not only was it extremely infectious, but it could disfigure and even destroy people in a week or two. Infection was caused by breathing contaminated air or touching something that had been in contact with the variola virus. Following a 12-day incubation period, tiny red pustules would appear and eventually spread all over. These would soon burst and begin oozing pus, ravaging the body. In about a third of cases, their victim would be dead within days. For those who survived, they were often left disabled and permanently disfigured, with deep pockmarks replacing the old pustules they once had. By mid-April, it was clear that smallpox was spreading throughout the hospital and that it could not be contained. The city's Board of Health made a catastrophic error in discharging all patients who did not appear sick. Many of them were in various stages of incubation, of course, and they spread the virus all over the streets of Montreal. As the summer arrived, the cases began to explode. The Montreal Board of Health began offering vaccinations against the disease. The practice of vaccination, developed by researcher Edward Jenner in England in 1796, was widespread at this point. However, this revolutionary medical science was highly distrusted by Montreal's French-speaking Catholic population at the time, among others globally. Indeed, in 1802, a cartoon of the early controversy surrounding Edward Jenner's vaccination theory was published. It showed how using his cowpox-derived smallpox vaccine triggered cattle to emerge from his patients. While English and Scottish Protestants, along with Irish Catholics, generally supported the vaccination drive in Montreal, the majority of French Catholics were opposed to this British science. This is due to the fact that the ancestors of these French Catholics had been colonized by the British in 1760, making for a very fresh wound and a healthy mistrust of British authorities. As the summer wore on, the smallpox cases only continued to grow. Montreal was gaining the reputation of a city of plague, causing many to avoid it at all costs. People infected with smallpox were seen roaming the streets along with their children, despite being highly contagious. By July, the disease had spread across the city, and every night more and more bodies were being carted up to the Côte-de-Neige cemetery in hearses marked Smallpox Picote. When Sir Francis Hincks, a former Prime Minister of the province of Canada, died of smallpox, his body was hastily buried at the crack of dawn with only a handful of family members in attendance. With the coming of autumn, Montreal's smallpox deaths rose past 3,000 residents. The city's Board of Health decided to make vaccinations compulsory as of September 28, 1885. The board's chairman tried to counter increasing amounts of misinformation by saying, "It does not mean that people are to be seized and manacled and so vaccinated by force. It means that the vaccinator will go door to door of a house and ask for proof that all residing there are vaccinated." According to the Montreal Gazette, those who refused to be vaccinated would be fined and certainly not dragged away to the city jail. However, attempts by public health officials to enforce vaccination standards or even to carry away the dead were met with fierce resistance. Sanitation constables were assaulted as they removed corpses from the most infected neighborhoods, including Faubourg Saint-Louis. Often, when the authorities put up yellow and black warning placards on infected homes, residents would tear them down. When constables arrived at the home of a woman named Madame Chaput at 427 St. Catherine Street to placard her home, she ripped it out with her hands. As police tried to restrain her, her husband emerged and started shouting that his wife was being assaulted. An angry crowd began to gather, and the constables were forced to retreat. However, the mob followed them back to the Health Board's East End office and surrounded it. Around 7 p.m., angry protesters began throwing rocks through the windows of the office. When the police chief tried to rush inside through the mob, he was knocked down with a blow from a stick and kicked till nearly insensible, as reported by the Montreal Gazette. As the mob swelled to more than 2,000, the rioters began a rampage through the streets of Montreal. They smashed the windows of pharmacies selling the vaccine, as well as the homes of doctors who supported the vaccination drive. After about an hour of rioting, the howling mob began moving towards City Hall, shouting, "Kill the vaccinators." When the mob descended on City Hall, also the location of the police station, rioters began throwing rocks through the windows. According to the Boston Transcript, revolver shots were freely fired at the police. To scare the men, the police fired over their heads, only to be received by jeers and laughter. Finally, after midnight, a large group of police officers arrived and began clubbing the protesters. By 1 a.m., the crowd was dispersed. 2 protesters were reportedly killed during the riot, and property damage was extensive. The following day, the mayor called in the military to restore calm. By the end of the year, smallpox had taken well over 3,000 lives in Montreal and had disfigured thousands more. 9 of 10 victims were French Canadians, most of whom were children. Some of the buildings in the Faubourg Saint-Louis dating from the 1885 smallpox epidemic still exist today. One example is Maison Brossard Gauvin, situated at 433-435 Rue Saint-Louis and built in 1735. Another is the 1828 Maison Brossard at 454 on the street. These buildings witnessed the countless horrors that unfolded throughout the neighborhood. Needless to say, with all of the death and suffering in Faubourg Saint-Louis, some paranormal experts believe the area is now haunted by its tragic past. There have been numerous paranormal reports. The disembodied cries and moans of children sometimes can be heard. There have been sightings of disfigured ghosts roaming the streets, many limping. Perhaps the most terrifying spirit is that of a young woman wearing tattered clothing and carrying a dead child, both of them covered in smallpox pustules. Historian Michael Bliss's book, Plague, A Story of Smallpox in Montreal, describes the horrors in full detail. He covers everything from the hellish atmosphere within smallpox hospitals to the decrepit homes where family members guarded their rotting deceased from being removed by sanitation officers. One infected woman was evicted from her boarding house on Rue Saint-Louis after both she and her child contracted smallpox. With nowhere to go and suffering from the disease, the woman was forced to roam the streets with her child. A woman named Virginie confided in Haunted Montreal about her experience living in Faubourg Saint-Louis during the 1980s. She resided in an old building and at first did not experience any problems. Unfortunately, after a few weeks, she started having recurring nightmares. In her horrible dreams, she would go to her washroom to put on her makeup for the day. However, when she looked in the mirror, she was shocked to see red pustules all over her face, oozing with pus. She always woke from these nightmares in a cold sweat and developed insomnia, going to see a therapist eventually to treat the issue. Despite several sessions, she began to suspect that the issue was paranormal after hearing from other locals about the smallpox ghosts haunting the Faubourg Saint-Louis. After only 8 months, she broke her lease and moved to another part of the city. It was then that the nightmares stopped. Another notable smallpox ghost can be found in the Plateau neighborhood on Esplanade Street. You can learn more of his tale in the video linked up here. In 1980, the World Health Assembly declared that smallpox was eradicated following a global campaign of vaccination. Thankfully, the deadly scourge no longer circulates, but some samples are kept in high-security laboratories for research purposes. While smallpox may no longer haunt the citizens of Montreal, its disfigured, ghostly victims from 1885 certainly do. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who has had a strange experience in the Faubourg Saint-Louis? If so, we'd love to know. As always, we want to hear your theories about what could be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If this is your first video, we do hope you'll stick around for the next one. We post videos in both French and English every second Saturday. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to purchase tickets to in-person haunted storytelling experiences. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll have a new video out in a couple weeks, but until then, stay spooky.